You're listening to podcasts from the Congressional Internet Caucus Advisory Committee, www.netcaucus.org.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Tim Lorden. I'm the Executive Director of the Congressional Internet Caucus Advisory Committee, and this is our first recess briefing of the year. So thanks for coming. And this will be 1 hour, really quick, on the issue of internet drones. I have a bit of housekeeping. Today, our hashtag for the event, if you want to follow on Twitter, is pound internet drones. And keep that in mind in case we'll publish the video and the audio podcast after the event on that particular hashtag. And then you can also follow on the conversation if you'd like. Our account is at NetCaucusAC, and that's our Twitter account, at NetCaucusAC, so you can follow us. This event is hosted in conjunction with the Congressional Internet Caucus and its co-chairs. And on the House side, that's Congressman Bob Goodlatte and Congresswoman Anna Eshoo. And on the Senate side, the co-chairs of the Internet Caucus are Senators John Thune and Senator Patrick Leahy. We're thrilled that they support this program since, we don't take positions on anything, but we hash out pretty much every issue. And frankly, the co-chairs of the Congressional Internet Caucus actually agree on very little when it comes to policy, but we're really thrilled that they actually allow us to host this program that hashes out all the different issues in a kind of a fair dealing type of way. Today, our moderator is going to be Brian Fung, and he's from the Washington Post. He blogs on The Switch. And on Tuesday at noon, he does a live chat where you can go on and ask him and his fellow tech reporters at the Washington Post any question you want, no matter how ridiculous. So he also published a story today on internet drones or drones in wildfires, and maybe you can talk about that as well. That is pretty much all the housekeeping I have. We'll probably pick up our briefings in the fall. And if you had told me years ago when I started this job that I would do a briefing on drones and the internet, I think you're crazy. And I think in the fall we'll have a briefing on robots. So keep an eye out for that one. And I'm going to hand it off to Brian.
Thanks, Tim. So welcome, everyone. This is going to be a really exciting conversation. Definitely hoping to get a lot of questions from you guys as you guys are trying to learn more about what's going on in the drone space. But I think first what we're going to try and do is watch a video that Paul here has provided us. And then I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves really briefly, and then we'll jump into the meat of the discussion. Cool? So I think the video is showing over there. So what you just saw, in case you're not familiar, is Amazon's program to bring you your goods that you've ordered from Amazon in half an hour or less via drone. The program is called Prime Air, and I guess before we jump into that, just wanted to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we can turn back to some questions. Paul?
Thanks, Brian. The one thing you need to know about me is I've been in the same job for 15 and a half years, a span over which I think Michael has had 7 or 8 jobs, and I've hired him for several of those. By the way, I'm Amazon's Vice President for Global Public Policy.
Hey everyone, Lisa Ellman. I'm currently at Hogan Lovells, where I lead our global UAS unmanned aircraft systems practice group. And previously, I was working in the federal government. I worked for the Obama administration for many years, and most recently ran domestic drones policy at the Department of Justice.
Hi, Michael Droback. I'm with Aiken Gump, Strauss, Hauer, and Feld, but more importantly for this conversation, I'm the executive director of the Small UAV Coalition, which is gratuitous plug www.smalluavcoalition.org. We represent both the manufacturers, the software and hardware producers, the accessory companies, a whole host of industry players in this field. So we're 30 members strong. And some of the members, and welcome to John Resnick, who just showed up from DJI. We've got Verizon here, Intel, Google, X, Amazon Prime Air, GoPro, Airware, Drone Deploy. The companies are doing things that are just so exciting. So that's the coalition.
So I'm about to ask the most important question of the day. I'm going to ask Paul, when can I get my toothpaste delivered by drone?
Well, Brian, it's going to depend a lot where you live around the world. It'll be sooner in some places than in others. The challenge for us here in the United States is to try to make it here first. We're a little bit behind, but we can talk about how we can get back in the lead.
Lisa, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say that so as is so often the case, unfortunately, the technology in this area has moved so much quicker than the policymaking. And where you have the technology in the drone technology itself has improved exponentially over the past few years, such that drones are cheaper, more mobile, and more useful to industry than ever before, at the same time as we see improvements in information technology. And so there's been a huge demand across the board. Hobbyists' use of drones, of course, has been broadly authorized for many years, many decades. And but now companies such as Amazon and many others can't wait to be able to use drone technology here in the United States to enhance their safety and efficiency. And there are so many benefits, but the policymaking has dragged behind. As Paul said, hopefully that will change here in the next few years, including with your help here in this room. But we have started to see a lot of improvements over the past several months here in the United States and hope to see additional improvements very soon.
So, Paul, could you just sort of walk us through some of the latest on Prime Air and what we can expect in the next few months? I think the last time I checked, Amazon had been working on its, I think it was the 8th or 9th revision to its drone. What goes into a design like that, and where is it going to go?
Thanks, Brian. There are a lot of technological challenges that need to be overcome. We're working on them. The technology is developing very quickly. We've got a team of roboticists, engineers, a former NASA astronaut. I've got a guy on my team who's a 7,000-hour pilot, military and commercial. So the effort is a big one, but the technology is producing great results already. We're very pleased with the testing we've been able to conduct now in the United States and also elsewhere around the world. The R&D efforts are bearing fruit, and so the technology's there. Now we have to get the regulatory regime in place, and we're looking to the folks in this room for help there. We have a significant challenge, but not an insurmountable one, and so we're going to talk about that, I'm sure, later today.
Michael?
So I concur with the discussion that the technology is there and that it's time for us to act. And the reality is that I don't think anyone on this panel is, I don't think anyone will, would disagree that everyone in the industry that we speak to on the coalition and friends of the coalition want to do this and operate and execute safely and within the expectation of consumer privacy. So if you're doing something safely and you're doing it with the respect for the consumer and the customer, I think there should be a little more latitude given. And I think one of the things that we've been calling for right at the outset as a Small UAV Coalition is an incremental approach, which is let us not hold up the micro UAS because we're trying to come up with something that will solve all of these problems. I think what we're going to see is you'll see a trajectory that's going to be just beautiful, which is you'll see areas and certain vehicles that can be used for a panoply of different services and purposes that can be online right away, and that can be done so safely. And then you'll see operations where you're getting your toothpaste. Now, I would encourage you to get it, and because I've been speaking with you already, and so getting some toothpaste via drone would be great. But the point is, it's going to take a trajectory where we are acknowledge that we have a micro UAS rule, and then we're up into operations that are just going to really blow the mind.
So, with that in mind, we've talked a bit about the delivery of goods and services via drone, but what kinds of other applications are there that really excite you?
Well, thanks, Brian. So I would just add to the package delivery, just to say that I think that drones are completely going to transform our economy in industries across the board. And every industry that doesn't realize that they have a use for drone technology now will down the road. Kind of like cell phones. When cell phones were first invented, we never imagined all of the different apps and uses that would come out of that technology. So we're seeing precision agriculture, for example, is going to be a huge one where crop dusting and plant inspection is going to be made much more safe and much more efficient. Keeping critical infrastructure inspection safe and effective flare stack inspection, for example, cell tower inspection, pipeline inspection, being able to travel hundreds of miles to examine pipelines. Drones will be able to do that with additional safety. The first to get approvals through the 333 exemption process, which we'll talk about, were the filmmakers. And it makes a whole lot of sense that using a drone rather than a helicopter on a film set to film a movie is a lot safer in case of an accident or in case something were to go wrong. You have a few thousand-pound helicopter versus a small drone, and is just as effective. And so in countless industries across the board, we're going to see the use for drone technology making itself clear, and we already see that in the range of industries that are already applying to be able to fly under the 333 exemption process, which we have well over 2,000 companies that have already applied for the ability to fly, and close to 1,000 authorizations as of this morning.
I dispute nothing that was just said about the industries this is going to impact, and I would say it's going to be ubiquitous across every sector of the economy. The FAA, Department of Transportation, in its own analysis of its NPRM, said that this was going to impact 300 or more sectors of the economy, and it went on and on. And I think it's easy to look at some of the industries like the close-up filmmaking and say, it's going to be amazing, and we represent companies that are in that space, so it's great. But we're also talking about, and I haven't read your article yet, but I will. We're also talking about what I think is going to be probably one of the most important parts of this, beyond package delivery, of course, Paul, and that is search and rescue, disaster management. Being able to, there's a big discussion about the fact that there are hobbyists and recreational users who are interfering with first responders. Well, that's against the law, period. It's already against the law. And yet we're seeing all these state laws come up that say we've got to mandate that this can't happen. Okay, well, if you want to make redundant laws, let's make them. That's fine. But it's against the law to do what they were doing. And the reality is, I think I'd rather have I was on a panel with the sheriff of the fire chief of Menlo Park, who said, we own one, we just can't use it. And we want to. We want to send it in beforehand so we don't have to send some people into dangerous situations. So I'm looking at the industry in terms of what can we do for the humanitarian part of this. And for example, DJI and Linking the World just met. Linking the World is a humanitarian organization that works with disaster management both domestically and internationally. And the conversation was, they have a project called Halo. And it's how can we use drones to bring pharmaceuticals, to bring food sources, to bring things to communities that are otherwise unserved. And I'm sure everyone saw over the weekend where Facebook is saying they're going to be at 60 to 90,000 feet with a massive drone that's going to provide incredible internet access to the 10% of the world's community that isn't served. So right now we're talking about things that are going to make consumers' lives better and help them. So that's a part of it that's very compelling. The commercial aspect of it's also thrilling. But I just think we need to know that the scope of this is far beyond just a commercial interest. It has to do with being able to harness the power of technology to help people.
And so to go back to what Lisa was just saying, a lot of companies and a lot of organizations have been trying to use drones for their own operations, but they've been kind of held up by a slow regulatory process. Can you sort of describe, there's this Section 333 exemption process. For folks who don't know, this is a way for interested parties who want to be able to use drones to ask the FAA for special permission to test them under, and use them under sort of some set of limited circumstances. But Lisa, maybe you can talk a little bit about the exemption process and how that's been going.
Sure. Great. Thanks, Brian. So just to take a step back, you're currently unauthorized to use drones commercially here in the United States. It's an intent test. So if I want to fly my drone in a park with my family, that's completely, as long as I'm in not restricted airspace, not endangering anyone, as a hobbyist, that is totally fine. If I want to do that same flight and then sell those photos for $10 each because they're such great photos, that is an illegal flight. That is currently unauthorized by the FAA. Commercial activity is not yet broadly authorized. Hobbyist activity is. In 2012, Congress mandated that the federal government integrate drones into our domestic airspace. And the federal government was a bit slow moving to that process, but we've seen some action on that front in recent months. And on February 15th, the FAA released its notice of proposed rulemaking, which will broadly authorize commercial use of UAS here in the United States. Now, until that rule is final, which could be end of this year, perhaps next year, perhaps the next year, we don't know, you have to get special license from the FAA in order to be able to fly commercially. And there's a number of ways to do so. Many of them are very burdensome. The 333 exemption process was a way that the FAA devised, coming from Section 333 of the law, that would allow, in the short term, low-risk commercial operations here in the United States. And you're essentially saying, I understand under current law that a drone is an aircraft. I will abide by the federal aviation regulations. They don't make any sense as applied to drones. And here's how I will operate with an equivalent level of safety. It is somewhat of a burdensome process. Some of the rules don't make a whole lot of sense. For example, you have to have a manned aircraft pilot's license in order to fly under a 333 exemption. But nevertheless, over the last few months, we have seen the process streamlined and quickened so that we're getting a lot more folks permission to fly, which is an improvement. But it is a Band-Aid solution until we have a final rule. But as of this morning, there are approximately 1,000 authorizations. So we do have folks that are being approved to fly here in the U.S.
Michael?
Yeah, I would just like to obviously the process within the Section 333 is a little convoluted, and again, a lot of the same devices are coming before the same people to be approved over and over again, and they know the devices, and so we're just reinventing the wheel. It seems like a waste of time. The one thing I would not dispute with, but I think I would raise as a concern for everyone in this room is that the idea that the final rule is going to allow for broad use of the devices in the future, in my view, is a complete fallacy. The rule is imperfect, to say the least, which is you're not able to operate at night, which is critical for many purposes. You're not going to be able to operate beyond visual line of sight. You're not going to be able to operate over people unassociated with the project. So if you listen to that, that's a really interesting part of this. So in the DOT's analysis of their own NPRM, they said that between 2004 and 2012, 95 fatalities occurred because of cell tower inspection being done manually by human beings, and that each person's life could be valued at $9.2 million. I don't know where they came up with these the sums, and of course I don't put a value on life like that. But the reality is, if you look at that and you're looking at this rule, where are cell towers? They're not always in random places. In fact, and oftentimes you find that the projects that are most important are going to be done over people unassociated with the project. So we have a rule in place right now that we're waiting on that doesn't really take into account what this industry is going to be. If it's going to be ubiquitous, if it's going to be as revolutionary as it can be, this rule, we shouldn't be waiting for it. It was supposed to be next month that would be final. It will not be. Then some said maybe February 2016. I don't think many are holding their breaths for that. And again, I think we're probably talking 2017 or later. So it's going to take an act of Congress. And mind you, the FAA has already told Congress we're not going to respond to the mandate you've given us once. I think the reality is that this rule has to be broadened. We have to think micro. We have to think incremental. And then we have to allow this industry to flourish the way it can.
So, Paul, as someone who works for a company that's gone through this process, can you sort of describe, what it was like asking the FAA for Section 333 exemption, and then to Michael's point, would Amazon support a legislative effort on drones, and what should go in it?
Yeah, well, what Lisa and Michael have described is accurate. We had a difficult time getting permission to test our drones outdoors, and we were proposing to do so in a rural area of Washington State on property that we were in complete control of, away from people. And it just turned out it took a long time. I think part of it, the FAA was just finding its way at the time. I think they've improved this kind of a process tremendously since we went through it. We were one of the first ones to apply. But this, as Michael underlined just a moment ago, is not the end-all at all. Our biggest concern at this point is that we're not adequately preparing for the real uses of these drones that would be beyond visual line of sight at a great distance and operating in a highly automated way. I mean, the notion of having one pilot or operator per drone is it just would undermine the capabilities of this technology, which are manifest, but if we're not planning for it here in the U.S., we're going to miss out on these opportunities. I suppose, and I'm not here to beat up the FAA, I really don't want to. What we're asking is that policymakers in Washington take very seriously the notion that we need to plan for the future now. I'm not suggesting that we're ready as a government or a nation to adopt rules today that would allow these kinds of highly automated, beyond visual line of flight rules. We need to plan for it, though. We need to start planning for it right now in a way that is being done elsewhere around the world. Amazon is a global company, as you know, and so I started off by saying it's not clear when we'll start offering the service simply because it's not clear where we'll be able to offer it first. We want to serve our customers globally, and if that's in other countries first, that's so be it. But what's happening in other countries, though, we're seeing planning for that highly automated, beyond visual line of sight kind of operation. We also see something else that's less apparent here in the U.S., which is taking what we call a risk-based approach to regulation. Now, these small UAVs are indeed small. They're lightweight. They don't fly very fast, and as a result, their kinetic energy is significantly less than for a manned aircraft. Kinetic energy is a function of 1/2 mv squared, so you can see that just the mass of it is a factor in determining how much kinetic energy and thus how much damage can be done in some sort of a mishap. So to take a risk-based approach is to acknowledge that a catastrophic failure in a package delivery drone could simply mean that the drone is disabled and falls to the ground, and it knows where to fall by itself. It knows how to avoid things, and then it's abandoned. Well, that's not a catastrophic failure in the same sense that a crash of a commercial airliner would be. And so we can't treat the regulatory regimes identically. We really need to take a truly risk-based approach. The FAA has suggested that it will. It's just the suggestions aren't quite as strong and clear as they are, for example, at EASA and JARAS, two organizations primarily in Europe.
So, Paul, you were just sort of touching on some of the potential liabilities or vulnerabilities associated with drones. So let's pick that apart now. I mean, there's obviously a big safety component here. What happens when a drone loses control and has to stop somewhere? Who has to then take responsibility for that? But also, what are some of the sort of security concerns? We've been hearing lots in recent weeks about potential hacking vulnerabilities, and our drones. What kinds of things are we putting in place to protect our drones from hackers and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so safety is our top priority, and is the top priority of many of the companies that are involved in this. One of the things that we've seen is the regulatory regime for historical reasons is sort of upside down, where right now hobbyists who may or may not have any training at all or may not be particularly safety conscious are allowed to do things that companies who, for a lot of reasons, need to be safety conscious. As we start deploying the drones, we're very well aware of concerns about security and about risk and liability. We're just so focused on keeping these things safe that we're very confident that it can be done. I mean, there are mitigations that we have in place already that we're developing in all these areas. What we ought to be able to do, however, is to prove the safety of it by showing these mitigations, show how they work, and have these be allowed into a regulatory regime once we're able to do that. If we're not able to do it, if we're not able to convince policymakers that these things are safe, well, then that's a problem. But we're going to be able to do it. We just need the opportunity.
One of the things that I find really interesting about a different kind of emerging technology, which is self-driving cars, is that a number of car makers like Google have been sort of very transparent about, our self-driving car was in an accident this day, and there were no injuries, but here's exactly how it happened. And I think is anyone in the drone industry sort of looking at increasing transparency with reports of that kind or of any other kind? What does that look like in the drone industry?
It appears I'll be answering this question. So I would say this. There are a lot of discussions about what technology can be brought to bear in providing just that information. And I think one of the things that I hasten to kind of suggest, lest this audience get the wrong impression, is that I own a number of drones, and one of them, for example, is a DJI Phantom 3. And I didn't know if I was outside of 5 miles of my house, and so I turned it on, and it was disabled. I was unable to fly it. And I was unable to fly it because it was aware of where I was, and it then disabled my use of it. So
for folks who don't really,
right, yeah.
Can you explain how that system works and why it is that your drone is grounded?
So there's a geofence, and it recognizes where I am because I'm allowing it to. So I'm using my iPad on my actual controller for my DJI Phantom 3, which is, by the way, awesome, and I love it. And I'm taking photos of my family when we're not within 5 miles of an airport. But the geofencing technology recognizes where I am, recognizes what the existing no-fly zones are, and it prohibits me from flying in areas like that. So I went out, and Paul Braden, a friend of mine here from the Internet Society, went out to his home because he's far enough out from airports. In fact, you're way too far out, my friend. But we went out and we flew safely in areas where we had a blast. And the same is true with Parrot's products. The same is true with 3DR's products. The other part of this is that as we've seen this technology is evolving, and Paul's right about this kind of risk-based approach, and as well as an incremental approach, is that we're not asking lawmakers or policymakers to immediately jump to kind of it's going to be millions of drones in one small airspace. But that's not what's being asked. I mean, I think what initially was being asked was, can we test somewhere? Can we be able to explore what kind of technology can provide the safety? But if you're unable to operate at all, and if you're unable to test successfully, it's very difficult to then iterate a product. And so what's great about what's happening is that you see companies like Verizon saying, we're going to be helping on communications, command and control, lost link. We're going to, and everyone's looking for answers right now. And I think the beauty of it is there's really good corporate citizens saying, we'll help find them. And so you could look at, RFID technology. You could look at registries. Now, a lot of that may be too much, maybe overkill. But I can tell you right now that it's both on the commercial and recreational front, there is so much that can be gained for society that the slow pace of kind of rulemaking isn't going to get it done. And so back to your point about legislation, we do need legislation. We need it this Congress, and hopefully we can work with Senators Hoeven and Booker on their bill and others.
And just to add to what other folks have said on the transparency point, and there are companies who realizing that these public policy issues, these safety issues are paramount in order to be able to fly beyond line of sight, in order to be able to fly over people, have partnered with the federal government. So you have CNN in the FAA's what's known as the FAA Pathfinder program. CNN partnering with the FAA to do research and development to figure out what technologies are necessary in order to safely be able to have news gatherers fly in crowded cities with drones. You have Precision Hawk and BNSF partnering with the FAA in order to do research and development and make all that research and development, by the way, available to the public on what is necessary to have drones that safely fly 300 miles in order to inspect railroads, for example, or for precision agriculture purposes. And so there are companies out there who have partnered with the federal government to do some of this research and development, make that data available to the public so to help our policy making along. Because kind of as we've talked about the rulemaking, it is an iterative approach. This was just the first draft of the rule. It has a lot of work to do before we get to the point where we can take advantage of all of the many benefits, the significant safety and economic benefits that drones offer. And so it is hoped that this will provide us with some data to help get us there.
So I want to come back to this public safety and geofencing issue because I think this is one area where it'll be really interesting to see who has the authority to set geofences, and I can imagine a situation where not just in DC where there's kind of like a permanent no-fly zone that drones are obeying, but also in cases like in California with wildfires, as we were sort of talking about earlier before the panel, you never really know when a wildfire is going to pop up, and so is that a situation where you would want a geofence up to keep drones from accidentally flying in there? And if so, technologically, how does that work, and who should be responsible for inputting that into the drone's software? Who should be responsible?
So I would say this. I think what we're trying to get at in this question is, how do you stop morons from taking technology and abusing it? Yeah. And I think the answer ultimately is that, and who should decide how to handle these morons? Right.
Is that a federal issue, or is that a state and local thing?
So I think, if we believe that the FAA has exclusive jurisdiction over the airspace, which we've just found out it does, through the NTSB, then I think what we have to say is that the federal government has exclusive jurisdiction, and that there should be some coordination with state and local officials as well around what makes sense. But I don't think the knee-jerk reaction should be to write redundant laws. I don't think it should be to say we need to panic to the extent where when someone acts in a fashion using technology for purposes it was not intended, that we need to overreact. That seems to be that which stifles technology, not that which allows it to prosper, and not that which allows good corporate citizens and good citizens that are availing themselves of the most incredible technology. All it does is stifle innovation. And so what I've seen in discussions with both recreational, kind of hobbyists, civil, and commercial potential operators is that their jobs and their focus is on how to do it safely and what technology can be brought to bear. I think the no-fly zone around D.C. is too big. I think we're going to the point where now we're saying because some drunk government employee, totally mismanaged his drone and threw it over the White House fence that we got to be crazy. Keep in mind, it's the President of the United States that actually sitting president, called for the notice of proposed rulemaking to come out. I mean, how often do you hear of a sitting president calling for a notice of proposed rulemaking to come out because of the significant impact it will have on the economy? You never hear of it. And this is our president who wanted to see it happen, and the rule was supposed to be finalized on September 2015. It's not going to be. And I agreed, it's iterative, we're going to go through this time, but we shouldn't be at a point where Congress told them to come up with a rule, and we're here now. And I think that's something that has to be addressed.
So, we've been talking a lot about legislation, but there's also already a lot of action that's being done by, private companies to try and develop some kind of voluntary set of, common behaviors, right? And so Amazon recently proposed, setting aside a slice of airspace for the use of commercial drones. Paul, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, Brian. Last week we announced a proposal, and it is just that, to segregate low-altitude airspace in a way that would separate drone traffic from manned commercial or private aircraft. The concept would be that below 400 feet and above 200 feet would be sort of like a throughway where drones could fly at relatively high speed. These are still slow compared to most aircraft. But from place to place, it's a transit pathway. Below 200 feet would be reserved for local operations, takeoff and landing, or things like agricultural use or inspections at low speed. And above 400 but below 500 feet, it would be a no-fly zone. And then above that is where manned aircraft could fly. And the whole concept is by segregating the airspace this way, you just provide a degree of separation, a buffer, so that the drones are not intermingling as much as they otherwise might with manned aircraft. This works for use cases at low altitudes. Obviously, the use cases that are at very high altitudes need to go through that highly used airspace at higher altitudes, and different kinds of procedures would have to exist for them. But for the vast majority of numbers of drones, they could all be flown very safely at these low altitudes. There also could be areas specified, almost the inverse of geofenced exclusionary zones, but inclusionary zones, which would be designated as safe zones for flying for hobbyist purposes, recreational, other purposes. And those would be, again, away from congested airspace.
Yeah, Lisa. Did you have something to add?
Oh, no, I was just going to add to what Paul said. So Paul's proposal, Amazon released its proposal last week at the NASA conference, and there was also just a lot of related conversation about that has come up in the space of airspace ownership generally. And in this context, the question has been, there's this old concept called to he who owns his land owns the sky above, right? It makes a lot of sense. I own my backyard. Don't I own to the heavens above? Well, in the general manned aircraft context, the Supreme Court has examined this question and has said, there was a case called Cosby in 1946 where a family had a bunch of chickens in their backyard, and a military aircraft was flying very low to the ground over the chickens, killing the chickens, and that was 83 feet above their property, and they said that was a taking, that was a violation of someone's own property. So kind of intertwined with this whole conversation as well is going to be homeowners, what exactly airspace above my property do I own, such that it makes a lot of sense if I now want to be able to fly my own drone and take a picture of my house 50 feet above the ground and put that picture up on the web in order to sell my house. Well, that's a commercial use, and that's actually illegal, even though that is my property, and that is, and I'm trying to just sell my own house. As well, we're also having this security conversation about how to keep others out of our backyards. And so kind of with this air traffic conversation, there's going to be a conversation as well about airspace ownership, which we're hearing a lot about across the country right now.
There's a great point about the Cosby case, and there's actually a case that goes back to the 1800s, which was Gill v. Swan, and Swan was a guy who had a vegetable garden, and Gill was a balloonist, and went up in the air, and came crashing down, dragged over the vegetable garden, and then went into the barn and tore up the barn, and of course, Gill was found guilty, but not of flying over the airspace, of just destroying everything on the property when he actually crashed. And I think, one of the quotes that was by law professor Timothy Ravitch was something that was like, fences make good neighbors, but you can't put fences in the air. And I think one of the things that we should be thinking about in terms of this is education. And this is one of the things that we've been talking a lot about at the Small UAV Coalition, which is it's our responsibility as a coalition and as companies that have joined the coalition to help educate the public as to how to use this equipment, these technologies, devices, in a way that is commensurate with consumer expectations. I mean, the companies that are involved want it to succeed, and they want it to succeed because they care deeply both about the enjoyment and about the commercial opportunities that exist. So we launched a campaign called Know Before You Fly, and as a part of it, working with ethics in the House and Senate, we held a concert with OK Go. OK Go had gone to Japan to film a video, Won't Let You Down, where they were filming their video, and it's spectacular. If you haven't seen it, it's available on our website, but it's also available on theirs too. And so OK Go came, and 800 people came to this free concert. And it was a Know Before You Fly concert, and it was, here are the basics about what you have to do when you're going to be using a device either recreationally, and in the U.S. that's the only way you can do it, or get an exemption. The thing that's the most important is that we were a much smaller crowd, but the Northern Border Caucus was convened last week, and it did an event where Transport Canada came. And they said, they were very respectful, but their basic point was, we are trying to unleash this technology. We are not looking for, so our period of time to turn around exemptions is 24 days, and we consider that too long. The U.S. is 3 months, and it typically goes over. So their point is, we haven't had any problems. And again, it's because people are acting safely. But education is going to be an essential part of all of this. And that's why all the companies are working together around the Know Before You Fly campaign, other campaigns. There's AirMap, which joined the UAV Coalition, the Small UAV Coalition, has a program. Drone Deploy, others are working on how do we educate consumers around mapping and no-fly zones. How do we tell them how to effectively use the technology? And I think that's going to be a big part of moving from this risk-based approach, moving incrementally to a place where we're going to see operations that everyone can feel comfortable about.
So I want to open it up to questions. It's a little bit on the early side, but I want to, and at most of these types of events, I think, I certainly have, it takes a bit of time for me to sort of formulate and think about what I want to ask about. So I want to give you guys a chance to think first. And I have a lot of questions left for you, so I'll maybe keep asking questions until I see a question in the audience. But so one thing I wanted to raise is the privacy question. We were just talking about drones in your backyard, other people's drones potentially in your yard. I think last week we saw a case where there's a Kentucky man who shot down a drone that had crossed into his yard, and he was saying that was trespassing, and that he was worried that the drone would be spying on his kids in his bedroom or whatnot. Certainly I think a lot of people in this room would be worried if a drone were to even in a neighboring yard look into their home. What kinds of protections should there be, or safeguards should there be to ensure that people aren't being spied on?
Well, let me start by just saying, obviously, these are privacy questions, not drone questions, right? And so these are the kinds of issues that need to be resolved, period, with the introduction of new technologies, and it ought to be looked at holistically. From a use case like ours, it's going to be very easy to respect our customers and their neighbors' privacy. It's just that we don't have a need for surveillance.
No
that's
cameras and whatnot.
Well, there's got to be navigation equipment of some sort, and TBD what all that is, what is actually on the drone to make it safe. But there are other use cases which are obviously more problematic. Where's the dividing line between news gathering and voyeurism? Those are challenging ones more broadly. I think for commercial operations, it's going to be fairly easy to address privacy concerns, but it's incumbent upon us to make consumers, our customers, but also other people just as comfortable with the technology as we've become with it.
Just building on what Paul just said, so it's just taking a step back here, because we do hear in tons of communities across the country, what we're seeing from the states and localities is a lot of concern about privacy issues. The safety issues are out there. People are really, really concerned about privacy in particular. And just taking a step back here, drones are a platform for a camera, right? So are helicopters, or our cell phones, so are pole cameras. And there is an array of privacy laws and rules on the books that do already protect us. And so part of this is Paul just mentioned, maybe perhaps doing a public education campaign with the public about the fact that there are a huge long list of privacy rules and laws that do protect us. Because it is true that even though drones are just a platform for a camera, for some reason or another, perhaps it's because the word drone connotes drones flying overseas gathering intelligence. They have the same name. They're nothing alike. Whatever the case may be, for some reason, the American people do perceive drones differently. So there was an interesting study out of the University of Oklahoma that studied people's reactions to ground-based cameras versus drone-based cameras, capturing the exact same information, the exact same photos and footage. And people had a very negative reaction to the idea of drone-based cameras capturing that exact that same information versus the same information to monitor traffic, for example, from a ground-based camera. So it's something that we, as an industry, we all have to recognize and deal with. There is going to be in the same day that the proposed rule was released on February 15th, the White House also released a presidential memorandum recognizing, first of all, laying out the rules of the road for the federal government agencies that are using drones, and including limitations on privacy, transparency, accountability, and civil rights and civil liberties in the government's use of drones, and then as well setting up a multi-stakeholder process that will be run through the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, NTIA, at the Department of Commerce, which actually starts today in about 15 minutes. Today will be the first meeting of this NTIA stakeholder process, where many folks from industry will come together with government and civil society organizations and universities and have a conversation about privacy there's a lot of room for consensus on this issue, and so and talk about, do drones present unique privacy concerns? If so, what are those? If not, perhaps maybe our general privacy laws as a society just need to be updated, and that will take care of a lot of our concerns. So this is definitely, it's just something that we see a lot in popular culture. Do any of you watch Modern Family? Okay. There was recently an episode of Modern Family that was all about a drone spying on a family in their backyard above the swimming pool, and the husband was trying to swat the drone out of the sky, and his swimming trunks fell down. Of course, the drone got footage of that incident, sped off, and the next day on YouTube there was a video called "Drone 1, Idiot Nothing," and this is what the American people are watching. This is what's being seen in popular culture, and so it's definitely something where all responsible partners in the industry will only be flying drones in a way that is protective of people's privacy. It's just a conversation that we need to have so that folks understand that there are the rules of the road that are in place.
There's a question back there. Could you introduce yourself and stand up, please?
Thanks, Grace, very much. So the question had to do with what are we doing as an industry and maybe as a company specifically to address cybersecurity and hacking concerns. We're aware. I mean, from our very beginning, our roots 20 years ago, we've been a security company. It's been part of our culture, and we've had technological solutions all along, and we're going to have one for this one too. It is interesting that there's this tension, it seems to exist, between those who really, really, really want a person to be always in control of the thing, and if that's the case, then the communications link is paramount. But if they're highly automated, the thing can be smart enough to avoid the kinds of concerns you're suggesting. But that means that we have to be able to accept the notion of technology providing that kind of a barrier and that level of autonomy in each of the vehicles. So I can tell you from Amazon's perspective, we're on it.
Mm-hmm.
When you're looking at the potential of eventually there being a policy that does allow widespread commercial use of drones, have you been considering congestion issues in that nuclear airspace, especially if multiple companies are using this technology? And at what point does a certain level of congestion become a problem for the public?
So traffic concerns in the air. How do you deal with that?
Oh, I thought it was pollen and allergies. So the question did go to congestion. Callie, you're right that it presents challenges, but that's what managing the airspace is all about. And if these things know how to sense and avoid other things, it'll all work. And what we're trying to develop is a set of rules that recognize that more sophisticated kinds of drones can be able to detect and avoid anything, including other drones, unmanned aircraft, and the hardest things to deal with are the ones that don't talk, that just fly by themselves, and avoiding those is a challenge, but it's not an insurmountable one. Obviously, congestion is harder than no congestion. It's easier to fly in Montana than it is in New York City. But that said, it doesn't mean that both use cases are, or one or the other is possible or not. They're addressable. And it may be with different technology sets. It may be even with different kinds of vehicles flying in city environments as opposed to rural environments. You can imagine that In a city environment, you never have to fly very far. In a rural environment, that might mean that you need greater battery life. You have to optimize around that. Maneuverability might be at a premium in a city as opposed to in Montana. So these kinds of trade-offs are things that aeronautical engineers face every day, and we're on it. It's cliched, I get it, but the notion that we have to keep the traffic levels low is not realistic, nor is it helpful for the deployment of the technology and all the consumer benefits that it will bring.
So a quick follow-up question to that, Michael. Yeah.
I just want to jump in on those are two great questions that we just had about sensitive weight technology and cybersecurity. And I think what's great about the efforts of everyone here, at least within the community, is that we're not only working with the FTC, but we're working with the FCC. We're working with DHS. We're working with DOT. We're working with the Department of Commerce. We have what is, I think, in my estimation, one of the most revolutionary technology that spans so many different areas of the U.S. government. So we are working with DOT and FAA as well. I don't want to leave them out. But I would say that what Congress's role is here is great because it is such a multidisciplinary approach that has to be taken. What's been great about DHS and DOD and FCC and FTC is there has been a willingness to say, we just don't know, actually. We're not yet clear. But we know we have to move fast because we know that the actors involved in this want to do it right. And so this has been a very productive dialogue, I would say. And I think, my hope is that we do something that right away, within the FAA reauthorization, provided that it gets done, we get a micro rule on its way, as well as pathways to greater exploration of commercial use for larger vehicles. And all of that would be done with a prerequisite, which is that we can do it safely. And I am confident that every company, both the kind of civil, commercial, and recreational companies, that they are going to do this and help to ensure that this is done safely. Someone asked a question of me when I was out at the same UTM conference. They said, how did you get here? I said, well, by plane. And they said, well, yeah, but who operated the plane? I'm like, I'm a dummy. I'm like, the pilot. And the person looks at me and says, no, the pilot basically watched automation and made sure that it was working. And then when there was turbulence, the automation took control. And he's like, when you're sitting in your seat comfortably, thinking about what you're going to do when you land, automation is flying your plane. And then it lands your plane. And then I said, yeah, I represent the Small UAV Coalition. And they're like, dummy. But it was a wonderful conversation to have because we assume right away that this is something just totally new. When in reality, all of these things have had to be considered within every industry. It's just we're in an industry now where people are saying, oh my God, it's all new and it's scary. It's not new. It's not scary. And we can do it. And we can do it quickly.
So last week, or maybe it was the week before, Bloomberg had an article about how Google is developing efforts to try and do air traffic control for drones. I'm kind of curious, how much coordination is there between, say, Amazon and Google, or between others in the industry who are trying to develop these solutions? Is this Google doing its own thing and then Amazon doing its other thing, and how much coordination is there?
We talk frequently, and they have some ideas that they also presented out at the UTM conference, like we did, and they're complementary. I think we share this desire. The handful of companies that are really focused on the airspace, we share this desire to make sure that it works. If it doesn't work for everybody, it works for nobody. And so what we're trying to figure out is a way to manage that airspace. Obviously, there has to be government involvement. Ours are merely proposals. We're not policymakers. You guys are. So it's a cooperative relationship with Google and many other players, including members of Michael's coalition. And
the FAA is currently working on Next Gen, which is sort of its next generation of how its vision of the airspace is going to work. How does something like what you're working on with industry going to fit in with all of that?
So, thanks, Brian. There are technologies that have been developed for non-drone uses that have application within drones. And one of the areas of your expertise, Brian, in your journalism is with respect to telecommunications. There are different kinds of telecommunications technologies that can be deployed in different circumstances for drone operations. And it's not a question of which one. It's more like which ones, plural. And it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all thing. There are lots of opportunities, for example, for using existing commercial land mobile spectrum for various kinds of communications links. There are also kinds of identification technologies that would allow drones to show up very clearly and be recognizable by others. All these kinds of technologies will be coming together, and NextGen is one component of it. Obviously, it's a very important component, but it's NextGen and other things as well.
I think we had a question in the front here.
Yes, please. Thank you. I'm Linda Moore with Congressional Research Service. I am, by the way, a telecommunications expert for wireless technology. I have a particular question about smart cities. Have you looked at apps for smart cities? Has a city applied for using a drone not for public safety, but for sidewalk examination? For example, Amazon could fly its little drones over the sidewalks of a smart city and also report on sidewalk cracks. Has anything of that nature started up yet?
So the question is about how cities could use drones. Smart cities, I'm sorry.
Right, we don't want to serve dumb cities.
I'm out.
So I think there are many opportunities like that. I think these are the kinds of things. Great idea. I mean, I hadn't thought about sidewalk cracks. But there are multiple applications. When you start going around, you're flying around, and you're noticing things. You can notice a lot of things if you intend to. But this is kind of the flip side of the privacy concern. You don't want to be noticing things that you shouldn't notice. And so there's room for this. I think obviously things like weather. Weather forecasting, that's kind of a cool way to think about, well, what if you have a lot of vehicles flying about at different altitudes and different locations? Maybe they could also be kind of checking out what the weather is and feeding into larger systems. Just a couple of examples of applications. So I will think about smart cities and repair opportunities, let's call them. I think this city has at least 2 or 3 potholes. I could probably...
I think we had another question, in the back.
Alexis Sherby from the University of Texas. We've been talking a lot about affordances, regulatory affordances, but what kind of protections are you expecting to ensure, as a resident of Texas, I'm very excited for the future where tacos will be delivered into my window. However, I do know that both of my neighbors have shotguns as firearms suggesting the case in Kentucky earlier this week. And also, are you planning for a future where perhaps parts of the country will be more drone-friendly than others?
So the question is about drone regulations and whether or not certain states could be friendlier to drones than others. And it seems like we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier with Michael's comments on federal jurisdiction. But if we could sort of address it more broadly, that'd be great.
Sure. So I'll just take a first step. So, companies love drones. They can't wait to be able to use them, just like your question suggests. Can't wait to be able to use them for their own purposes, but they also are concerned about the others' use of drones. The others' use of drones, for example, if you're an oil refinery, having drones fly over your property, a power plant, a theme park. There are a lot of concerns both from people and also companies about others' drones flying over their property. Now, as Michael mentioned, it's in terms of jurisdiction, the FAA has jurisdiction over maintaining the safety and security of our national airspace. They would say that means the blade of grass up is under their jurisdiction in terms of safety and operations. However, states have traditionally regulated privacy, and so that's where we see all of these all this proposed legislation in localities across the country are proposing laws that would limit the use of drones in some way, generally based on privacy concerns. A lot of times it's to limit their own law enforcement use of drones, but sometimes it does touch on private use of drones as well. And I think that we are, on the privacy side, the federal government has traditionally, with some exceptions, left privacy alone to the states, and so we're going to see a bit of a patchwork. But of course, there are a lot of concerns about that as well, because the patchwork is very difficult for companies that fly in many states, and so there is a tension there.
I'd just say that I would love to get my tacos delivered by a drone. So count me in. I'd also say that your question actually, I think, is deeper than what the answer we're giving. You're saying, are we proposing to liberalize without restricting at all? And I think the answer to that is no. I don't think anybody on this panel, nor do I think any of the members of the coalition or others would say that the companies are simply looking to have free reign to do whatever they want. I think everyone is sensitive to the fact that we are working with technology that is kind of a green field that needs to have some rules. Now, the neighbors of yours have shotguns that want to shoot it out. That's a totally different discussion that needs to be handled by the medical community, because they can't do that. They can't shoot the drone out of the sky. There's a lot going on there. But I would say this: it's absolutely the case that rules that are going to be proposed are going to be there to protect consumers, but they're also going to be there to allow for innovation. So I think it's a nice mix.
Let's take one last question. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Emmanuel. I'm an intern at News Corp. So my question is really because since it's really about drones and like national security, we've seen stuff on YouTube where someone straps a gun to a drone and they start test shooting something. So will the use of drones lead to the rise of domestic terrorism, and what's being done about it?
Killer drones. Are they going to become a thing?
Well, all technology can be used for good and for bad, and that's not unique to drones, unfortunately. There are going to be people who want to use the technology in the wrong way. An armed drone that is shooting is obviously, there are several laws that are being violated there, and so part of it is about enforcing the laws that we have on the books. And of course, if you're using a drone in furtherance of a terrorist operation, then that is a violation of many laws right there.
One of the things I like to point out is that and I know that people here are supportive and on the panel, but I've heard for years the lawmakers come to the floor and speak in committee meetings about how this is such great technology to be used overseas in areas where we can save military personnel's lives. Because it's so targeted, because there's no collateral damage, because it's so precise. And yet those same lawmakers, some of them, are standing up now saying, we can't have them in the U.S. because it's so unclear and they're not precise. And I'm thinking to myself, well, wait a second. When they were advising we use them in some foreign incursion, and they said they were totally safe and there wouldn't be any collateral damage, and they went on and on about the technology, how can they now be completely abandoning that position? If they weren't safe then, why are we using them so much and increasingly so overseas? My view is that they must be safe since we're using them overseas, and therefore, let's start using them at home.
If I may, Brian, I'd just like to maybe close out with a suggestion. You all have very important jobs in federal policy making. It seems to me that drone flights in the United States are very clearly a matter of interstate commerce. This is your purview. Congress has plenary authority over interstate commerce, always has, and it needs to be used. We can't have that patchwork. We really can't. It's not going to serve consumers ultimately, and you have the opportunity to set policy. I invite you to get in early on all these conversations. The one that needs to be had right now as soon as possible is this flying beyond visual line of sight with highly automated technology. Those questions just simply are not being addressed enough in the United States, and they are being addressed overseas. And so to the extent that Congress can prod, either in oversight or in legislation, the relevant agencies, and there are multiple, to get the job done here, you will have done a great service to the country. Thank you.
Lisa, anything else you want to add before we let you all go?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks for having us. First of all, I think it's really important to have a public conversation about the benefits of UAS as well as, of course, all the security and privacy risks. Nobody in the industry wants to go about this in a way that is not safe, that is not respective of people's privacy. And it's important to have a very public conversation about the benefits. Drones are here. They're here to stay. And, I think together, policymakers and innovators can craft a way forward. And so thank you for hosting us today.
Well, that's all the time we've got. Thanks for coming. I think we'll be sticking around here for a few minutes afterward if you want to come chat. But otherwise, appreciate it and have a good day.